Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Gunning with Focus Academy based here in San Francisco. Welcome to our last webinar of this particular financial year, at least for us in the US. And I'm delighted to give you a very broad kind of understanding of what's going on with expanding to the US market. So first of all, I would like to just give you a little bit of background on Focus Academy. We're based here in San Francisco. We run what we call an activation hub. We're working with startups in the life science, health, biotech space. We also deal with a lot of science-based technologies. We've been working with Japanese cohorts of companies for quite a long time. Over the last 4 years, we've been running a program called the Global Acceleration Hub, and we partner with international foundries from all over the world. Our focus is working with startups and helping them understand what they need to do when they come to the US market. We have a broad academy of our faculty, I should say, of advisors, and I'm thrilled today that we're able to bring a number of those folks here to meet with you. This is just an example of what we provide. We have dedicated desks and lab space in San Francisco and in Silicon Valley. We also provide space for events and webinars. We run boot camps, acceleration programs, both virtually and in-house. And we have lots of shared amenities that we can provide to the startup community as they are looking to expand, develop their markets here in the US, raise money, and keep a lean footprint. So having this available in the center of San Francisco is very important. And we're able to offer this lab space to you, the JETRO clients, on an as-needed basis. So today we are joined by 3 experts from our community. We have been hearing a lot about what companies are looking for, trying to understand what it takes to move here to the US. And so we thought this was a great opportunity to really bring this expert opinion on board from the financial, looking at trying to raise money. What does that mean for an international company? Of course, immigration is a big question, and we know that it can be very complicated. And we have Sophie Alcorn, who's going to join us and talk a little bit about how to break that down and make it a little bit more manageable to understand. And we're going to kick off with Jeff Wallace, who is one of our partners for a long time. He runs Silicon Valley in Your Pocket, has been involved in many acceleration programs, worked with a large variety of different technology and science-based companies, and he's also an angel advisor. So I'm going to kick off with Jeff and have him jump in and give us a little bit of his background and his expertise in what it takes to expand to the US market.
Thank you very much, Kate. Let me share my screen. I have an introduction to myself in the presentation, so I'll follow suit that way. And just to confirm that everybody can see my slide deck, make sure somebody just confirm for me if you would. Yes?
We can see it.
Okay, just needed one confirmation. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, today, as Kate said, I'm going to talk a little bit about getting real about US onshoring. And I'll describe a bit of my background, which is the basis of kind of how I coach and work with founders from all over the world to do this. Let me get in here. There we go. So here's just a handful of startup programs, including JETRO, that myself and our group at Silicon Valley in Your Pocket has had the opportunity to work with. So as you may recognize, I won't leave it here for quite a long time, but you may recognize there's a bunch of global names coming from really all corners of the world. We've worked with just around a little over 2,500 startups from about 40 different countries in the last 5 years. So it's been quite a journey and a wonderful opportunity to get a sense of innovation and entrepreneurship all across the globe. And for me personally, I won't go into any detail of this slide because there's way too much on here. I am going to provide these slides at the end, so I'll make sure to send this entire deck out and ask that it be distributed to anybody who's interested. So the short version of this slide is that I am an instructor of entrepreneurship and innovation at UC Berkeley. I am a UC Berkeley alumni from their MBA program. I'm very involved with UC Berkeley Skydeck, who I know you guys at Jetro have a wonderful partnership with. I'm involved not just as an LP in the fund, but as an advisor to a lot of the Skydeck companies. I've founded a couple of different startup accelerators, one located here near Berkeley called the Batchery. We are next week, we're hosting our 17th batch of companies demo day. So we've been involved in this from the outset and really doing quite a bit, as I said, across the world. I'll end with what I call on the bottom of the slide here, the Steves, just as a fun point for me as part of my own entrepreneurial journey is I've had the great opportunity to work with the two co-founding Steves of Apple in the late 1990s as an entrepreneur. I partnered with Apple and worked with Steve Jobs, getting a partnership. There was a number of meetings we held, and we were successful in getting a partnership with Apple around a education technology that we developed in the late 1990s. And then in the 2010s, I got onto the global speaking circuit, and Steve Wozniak and I have had the opportunity to collaborate on several events. And it's just, for me, it's amazing that I've gotten to meet such incredible people as part of my entrepreneurial journey. So getting back to the topic at hand on relocating or opening up opportunities in the US market, I always like to start with, well, why do you even want to come to the United States? And it's amazing when I ask this question of people who say, oh, we're ready to come to Silicon Valley. And you say, well, why? What's your purpose in coming here? Why do you think this is the right market? It's amazing to me how many people stumble on that answer. And it really is something really worth thinking about. Just because we're a big, huge market and spend a lot of money doesn't make it necessarily the right market for every company to come to, or every country, to come to. But it is a good market for a lot of good reasons. But the things you should really be considering is, are you looking at the United States as a sales channel? Again, because we are a large company, we do spend a lot of money. We're a very vibrant economy. Are you looking for partnerships? These are just things you need to really consider and really think deeply with your co-founders. If you're a team of co-founders, really think deeply about these issues, and not just about the United States, but map it against other prospective countries where there may be great opportunity for whatever your innovation is. Oftentimes we see people are simply looking for investment. And so that's certainly something we're very well aware of here. About 50% of all global, I think it's 30% of global, 50% of US venture dollars are here in California. About 30% of the world's venture is here in California. So it's a very vibrant investment economy as well. And then you have to think about if you want to incorporate in the US, if you're raising capital, it's kind of a necessity. If you're just going to sell product, but not necessarily raise investment, that may not be as much of a necessity. So different considerations based on your reasoning for wanting to come to the US markets. And then, are you interested in moving your staff? And I'm going to talk a little bit later about the kind of typical makeup of a company these days. And it may not be a wise idea. You know, the United States tends to be a bit on the expensive side. San Francisco or California tends to even be on the higher side of the expenses relative to the US, other US markets. So moving staff may not be the best idea. It may be a good idea. It just really, again, depends on your objectives. Some other key considerations that you should be thinking about is the timing. When would be the right time to move? Should you move before you have a version 1 product ready for market? Should you wait to time to move to when you are ready to launch into the market and maybe have some form of revenue generation going on? Pre-investment locally, if you can get investment there at home in Japan, or should you try to come over here before you get investment and get US investors? So timing the move is important. Which of your team members should be here in the US? And going back to my prior point about moving staff, again, it's not always necessary to consider uplifting or uprooting the entire team and moving them here, but it is probably very critical to have key market facing. Maybe these are people who can do business development or sales, create partnerships. Maybe there are people who can talk with investors. Those might be the right types of resources. Certainly, we recommend that one of the co-founders who fills in those kinds of roles or who has responsibility for those types of roles should consider moving, but maybe the rest stay back at home and do the work in a remote sense. Similarly, hang on. There we go. Some people want to just move in order to get that global experience, have a personal growth opportunity, to experience living in another culture, living in another geography, and building that bridge to the back home environment, maybe the company and the other team members that are back home. But do consider, again, the cost of living. If you were to move to the Bay Area, in many contexts, not necessarily for some places in Japan, because Japan has some of its higher cost markets as well, but in other contexts, it could be much more expensive to move here and live here. So understanding the cost of living, because that will dramatically impact the runway, meaning how long the money you have raised or have in the business will be able to last you. If the cost of living dramatically increases, that will obviously reduce or shorten your runway, and you'll have to think about how do you get to fill the bank balance up with more money to support the increased cost of living. And then, of course, we're going to hear after me, we're going to hear from Sophie, who is a master of immigration matters. But these are very important things that, outside of referring everybody I know to Sophie for these questions, we get asked quite a bit about how easy will it be for yourself or your team members to make the move over to the US in the appropriate ways so that you can conduct the kind of business you wish to conduct. And again, Sophie, we're blessed to have her on the call here tonight. She'll actually be able to speak very eloquently and fill in all the details around what it requires to have that, box checked, if you will. And then always, as we would say, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. You want to make sure that if revenue generation, for example, or investment dollars don't come in as quickly as you had anticipated or planned in your forecast, how are you going to survive and handle that, as we would call it, your worst case scenario? Make sure you have enough kind of money in the bank, enough cushion to make sure you can survive. You don't want something like that creating an existential issue where it might lead to the unfortunate closing of the business. And then do everything possible before you make the move. A lot of people wait until they land and then start figuring out some things that they need to do here. Our strongest recommendation is to maximize everything pre-move. Look at all the aspects of everything you'll need to do. Think about office space. Think about vehicles if you need to purchase a vehicle. All these little minute details. Think about all these things that will be involved in your living in the United States before you make the move. Look into them. Understand the realities of costs. It's not uncommon for companies to make the move and then find surprises. Oh, I didn't realize I had to do this. I didn't know I had to have automobile insurance when I moved and bought a car. I didn't realize how expensive petrol or gasoline is going to be. So think about studying that. And I say it like it's a hard thing. It's not a hard thing to do, but it's work that is very helpful if you're aware of it, and you'll avoid any financial surprises or other surprises. Now, thinking about how do you make the decision, we call it the go, no-go decision, right? How do you make the determination whether or not relocating and opening up opportunities in the US market is the right thing? Well, think about the value proposition of your innovation in the United States. It's different if you develop something in the market you're in Japan, it works well, maybe it works in other countries nearby. That doesn't necessarily translate and replicate in the United States context. So just really understand and study the market and the value proposition of your innovation in the US context. It's critically important to do almost an excessive amount of customer discovery. Really understand the customer in the US market and understand how your innovation fits in. I'll give a simplistic example. I was working with a company in Korea. They're in the pet industry, and they said they were very excited to come and move to the United States and sell their solution into the United States. And they were selling to basically registries, places that register pets. And in Korea, there is a national registry. If you have a pet, you go to the national registry and you register your pet. In the United States, there's something closer to 3,400 pet registries because it's done at a city and county level. And so trying to translate what you could do with one client, so to say, in Korea to 3,400 clients in the US, just think of how exponentially more complex that is. So they had not realized that when we were talking about their potential move or their considering of a move to the United States. So just those kinds of simple things. Really study that and understand the context of the US. Similarly, understand the market size. Sometimes market size here is big, sometimes market size here is smaller. It just depends on the innovation and the market for your innovation. Just because we may have a large population and we spend a lot of money doesn't necessarily mean we spend it in the areas that your innovation is covering. So really understand the market size, be very honest about the market, the addressable market and the obtainable market, how much of it you think, given the competitive landscape, you can truly acquire for your own business, and factor that into your forecast, whether it's a 2, 3, 4, or even a 5-year forecast. Make sure you understand the market size and how you're going to capture some of it. On that note, think about your competitive advantage, and not just the competitive advantage you may have in your innovation itself, but also the defensibility. I would call it 2 key words we think about in this context are differentiation. How does your innovation differentiate against any potential competitive offerings? And if you are able to gain a competitive advantage, what mechanisms can you employ to defend your competitive advantage position so that you maintain that advantage into some foreseeable future period? So these are really important things. It could involve IP, like filing for patents and other forms of legal protections like that, but there are many other ways to defend a competitive position that advantage that you may have been able to obtain. I just kind of touched on those issues here. So it's so critically important to understand the market space. Another simple example, we had a company we were working with out of Eastern Europe that was very excited as they were to come to the United States market. They had a very strong position. They were essentially a leader in their market in Eastern Europe. They were excited to move and relocate to the US, and we asked them to do a competitive landscape mapping. And this is a set of tools that we provide to our companies that we work with to really help them understand how to build a true landscape of the competitive market. And when they did that, they identified 32 direct competitors in Silicon Valley. And I don't mean in California or in the United States. I mean within about a 1-hour drive of where I'm sitting here in Silicon Valley. They identified 32 direct competitors. I think it probably goes without saying, they decided upon considering the go, no-go decision to not come to the United States and to maintain their leadership position in the Eastern European market. And here, I believe it's now about 6, maybe 7 years down the road, they're still doing very well, and they've expanded to neighboring countries in Eastern Europe and strengthen their competitive positioning. So really, really important to understand that in the US context. And then also understand the investor marketplace and what is the appetite, how interesting are your innovations to the investor community here in the United States. And, you know, we see certain things in different parts of the world sometimes operate at different speeds. So certain types of technologies are more interesting to certain investors at certain times in different markets. So just look at the investor landscape here in the US relative to your innovation, the category within which your innovation is positioned, and understand how the investment appetite is. Are there good investments going into the business category that you are operating in, and also at the stage of the business that your business is in, whether it's a seed stage, or maybe it's going into a Series A or Series B, a later stage. Just understand that. There's a lot of data that is available. You can follow groups like Carta. Carta is a cap table management company, but their colleague who is with Carta posts quite a bit of market information through the investor community. And it's really, really wonderful and insightful information that can help you when considering these kinds of moves. And then the last thing we often ask is, after you've done your analysis, the question is the US the right market, or might you be able to do better in another country? Our goal as mentors or coaches to founders globally is to help them identify the best opportunity market for them, wherever it may be. We are not interested in always suggesting the US is where you should be, or Silicon Valley is where you should be. It may be a great place for you to be, but there may be better opportunities elsewhere that maybe allows you the opportunity to strengthen your business. And with those strengthened resources and more resources that you're gaining, then use those resources to expand later with some confidence, with some traction underneath your belt from another market. So just something to consider as you're making these kinds of go, no-go decisions. Now, I mentioned earlier, I'll touch base on kind of what does the global footprint of a typical startup here look like. If you're coming to the US, and again, if you're really contemplating raising capital here, it's quite important to incorporate, and you would have a Delaware C corporation. That's a standard format or legal structure that startups have here for a variety of reasons, which I won't answer here, but I'm happy to answer later if anyone wants more detail. You might have your leadership based somewhere here in Silicon Valley. Again, that could be one or maybe two market-facing people who can handle your business development, your investor ecosystem outreach, et cetera. You might have global investors, some from home, Japan in this context, or wherever home might be for other founders. You may have a Silicon Valley investor who's going to lead the investment from this side in the US context. You might have sales offices near key customers. Now, maybe your key customers are spread out across the United States, and you might have sales offices close by to those customers to provide good hands-on, high-touch customer support. Your engineering teams, not uncommon for them to leverage teams out of Eastern Europe. I myself work with several teams out of Eastern Europe. We've worked with teams across the globe, but we have a number of teams that we do work with in Eastern Europe ourselves. You might have an accounting team in Mexico down in the country, south of us. Some of this is leveraging labor rates, the cost of these kinds of employees. I also have dev teams and sales support teams in South America with other businesses that I'm involved in. So this is a very common, as you see here, we also leverage the Philippines or South America for those other teams. This structure is really, really common for a company here. And again, it's leveraging skills and capabilities. It's leveraging language. It's leveraging market costs for labor. It's leveraging maybe time zones, English language skills as it comes into play if you're dealing with an American audience, et cetera. So it's not an uncommon structure. And it's certainly, again, worth considering rather than thinking about your whole team either being in Japan or your whole team being in the United States. So this is a good, consideration as well. Lastly, I'll put up on screen, and again, I'm going to share these slides, so you don't need to necessarily scan it now, but we do a formal US market readiness assessment. We provide a tool that allows founders just in maybe 10 minutes or so to kind of fill out a survey that helps them understand their market readiness to enter into the US market. And I will end with a thank you very much for your time, and I will look forward, hopefully, to answering some questions at the end after the other speakers have done their jobs as well. So thanks so much, everybody.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jeff. Oh my gosh, you covered so much in there. There's a lot to think about, and definitely a lot of ideas on how to be best prepared. And I think that's one of the things about this program is it does give companies the opportunity to spend some time really thinking about how to be best prepared for the market, because there is certainly a lot to consider, particularly, as you mentioned, just the cost of moving is huge. But thanks,
Absolutely.
Jeff. We'll hold off some questions until later on. And
Indeed.
I'm delighted to introduce Sophie Alcorn, who's based in Palo Alto. Sophie is a lawyer who's been working in the immigration and visa management space, I guess, for quite a long time, is specialized in working with startups. You may have seen her at some of the TechCrunch events that were happening here in the city more recently. But anyway, we're delighted to have Sophie here, and I'm going to just kick it off and have you give a brief intro and jump into what you think is important when it comes to thinking about coming to the US, which is so very important for the Japanese client. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kate. It is so great to be here. Hi, everybody. I'll be sharing for the next bit about how to get a visa or a green card so that you can live and work legally in the United States. So thank you so much for that introduction. Jeff, it's always great speaking alongside of you. It's so insightful, everything that you've shared. And so if you've already done Jeff's analysis and you've decided that with all of that, it is worth it for you or one of your colleagues to come here and expand and have some boots on the ground presence in the US, now we're going to be talking about how to do that through immigration. So I'm a lawyer, so I have all sorts of caveats. So this is all educational. This isn't legal advice. If you want a consultation, you're welcome to reach out to me. But this is not individual specific legal advice. That being said, there's so much I can cover. I can talk about this for days, but I'm not. We're going to try to limit it to about 10 to 15 minutes. So I'll share a little bit about myself and my firm with you, and then I'll give an overview of some visa basics and some green cards, which are pathways to permanent residence in the United States. And then I'm happy to take questions later alongside the other panelists. By way of background, I write for TechCrunch. I'm a lawyer. I wrote a best-selling book on immigration for startup founders. I'm a podcaster. Actually, my podcast with Jeff was just published, so I'll see if I can get the link to that for everybody in the chat window. And I believe the earth should be a place where each baby, I'm a mom, right? So where every baby that's born has the opportunity to become a fully self-actualized human being and be in their flow state and create amazing things that are going to help the world make a better place. So I'm all about removing artificial barriers like immigration that prevent that human potential from being reached. So that's one of the reasons I'm very passionate about immigration. Founded a law firm, Alcorn Immigration Law. I have 16 employees who are expert immigration attorneys, business immigration, visas and green cards and paralegals. And we help thousands of people every year from all over the world live and work legally in the United States. So normally I like to know where startups are at. Some of you might be in the US. I think you're all in Japan right now. So you may have been here already on various visas. You might be familiar. We have ESTA, the 90-day visa waiver program, B1, B2 business visitor visas. Maybe you were here as a student, an international student at a university, and you had an F1 visa. So a lot of these options will apply whether you've been to the United States in the past, or even if you've never been here before. You don't need a visitor visa to get a work visa. You don't need a visa to get a green card. A lot of these options can be put together in different ways creatively, depending on you and your goals and your family and your company and your startup aspirations. So you can definitely mix and match. So by way of basics, just a few concepts that I've already alluded to that are important with US immigration law. Most people come here on visas first. And maybe one day you want citizenship. So that's a US passport. Not everybody wants it. You don't have to get it. It's a long and winding road. There's a middle ground though, which is a green card. And that's what our nickname is for permanent residence. So most startup founders, a green card is going to take too long. Even if you were born in Japan and you're a Japanese citizen, it's likely, even if you're Albert Einstein, it would probably take you 3 years if you live in Tokyo right now to simply get a green card and move to the United States for the first time. So that doesn't work on most startup timelines when you need to expand your users with your US go-to-market and increase your US traction and raise money from US venture capitalists. So most startup founders start with a visa because that is a relatively easy way to move to the United States the next 3 to 6 months to establish an office, start working here, get paid in the US, legally work in the United States. You can bring your family. In many cases, if you're married, your spouse can work, your kids can go to school here. So most people start with a visa because you can get it in a relatively short time horizon. And if you're already here, you can switch from one category to another. But if you're in Japan, you're going to end up going for a visa interview at a US consulate. And that is where you will physically get a visa sealed. The foil will be sealed into your passport and it will say multiple entry work visa with some codes on it. And it will have a timeline for how long it's valid, how long you can come in and out. And then our laws regulate for every trip what you're authorized to do based on the category of visa you applied for and how long you're allowed to stay. So there are many, many categories, but I'm just going to cut to the chase. The best visa, in my opinion, for startup founders in 2023 and 2024 is the O1 visa for extraordinary ability. And I'll touch on other stuff too that's maybe easier if you're already making money in Japan or your company is established. But the O1 is a biggie, especially for early stage startup founders. And when I spoke at TechCrunch Disrupt in San Francisco in September, and I met several of the folks from Jetro, which was lovely. But at that conference in the trade show area, I got asked by a lot of people, Sophie, I haven't raised any money from venture capitalists yet. How can I get an O1? I haven't raised. And I said, you don't have to raise money. That is not one of the requirements. So how it works is there's 8 categories. If you can prove 3 of them, then you can come to the US. So yeah, we can argue that if you raise money from Andreessen Horowitz, that is an award. But if you've never got any venture capital funding, it's absolutely fine. So we're mixing and matching from these 8 categories. It's going to be different for you if you have an academic background as a researcher, versus if you dropped out of college to start your first startup. But there's no bachelor's degree required. It's very, very flexible. So we tailor it to startup founders. We tailor it to you. So one of the most common setups, remember, you only need 3 of 8, but for a startup founder of an early stage startup that has some traction in another country, and you're doing your US market expansion and maybe going to raise funding in the US, perhaps you got government grants, maybe startup grants, maybe scientific grants, maybe you raised a small amount of money in your home country from local angels or VCs. We could argue that all of those are awards. Or maybe you won an innovation award or a technology award in a professional association or in your country. We can use all of those types of things. If you've ever been a member of an accelerator or an incubator or a professional committee in an organization, maybe a scientific committee that's setting scientific standards, or even if you've acted as a startup advisor, we can say that you are a member of an organization that's hard to get into. We can also use any publicity. This does not just have to be about your current startup. It can be about prior startups, prior research, prior jobs at other companies. And this would work for Japanese press or US press or Japanese scientific magazines or business journals or international newspapers. So variety, but what we cannot use is a small town newspaper or a student newspaper from a university. There's another category that has to do with judging. If you've ever been invited to be the judge of a competition, such as a pitch competition, a hackathon, a technology award showcase, if you've ever judged any competitions, we can use that. What you created matters. So if it's relevant to your startup to be seeking a patent, even if it's just pending, not even if it's granted, but we can use that to show the novelty of what you've created. But a lot of software is not patentable. So in that case, we look to whether you disrupted the field in some way. In terms of authorship, if you have a scientific background, great, easy. If you wrote peer-reviewed scholarly research publications at a university, we can absolutely use that. But if you never did that, anything in Forbes can count. You can join Forbes Business Council or Forbes Technology Council based on your current startup accomplishments, and they'll let you write 1 article a month. I can help you write for TechCrunch. If you had an article go viral on a platform like Medium, we could use that. But as long as you're writing in your professional capacity something about your field for a professional audience, so a startup founder sharing startup how I built this stories with other startup founders, that could work. Those articles can count. Additionally, the more reputable your startup is, the more we can use your job as a startup founder as a leading role in a distinguished organization. And then finally, the amount of equity you have, if we can somehow value your startup, we can argue that you've already been well paid, or we can show your future salary in the US. So there's a variety of ways to use these categories. You need 3 of the 8 in order to qualify. It usually takes us 3 months to prepare everything for an O1, and then maybe 15 days for the government to make a decision in the US, and then you would book a visa interview in Japan to go get your visa and your passport, and you can probably move here within 5 months or so. You can stay for 3 years. Your spouse cannot work, so that is a downside. You can travel in and out as much as you want, and we can even set it up so that if you need to get money on the side of your startup from consulting or some other thing, we can set it up so that you are legally allowed to do that in the United States. And having this type of visa is an amazing advantage later if you want a green card to kind of bypass a lot of the wait times that other green cards have, because this is basically the visa for the people that the US thinks are the most brilliant entrepreneurs and scientists in the world who they want to attract to the United States. But it's definitely doable for early stage startups, including first-time founders. Even if you dropped out of college and you never had a startup before, I've helped so many people who were very humble to look at themselves and their accomplishments from a different perspective, and we were able to frame it and get them to the US to work and build their companies. So there are alternatives if you don't want to go through that, or if you don't want to spend time writing a bunch of stuff to become qualified. There's other visas as well. So if you already have a company and you've had employees and you have an office, let's say in Tokyo, and you want to transfer somebody to the US and they've already been working for you for a year in Japan, we can get them an L visa, which is for intra-company transferees to transfer to a US office. They can even start a brand new office for you. This is nice because the spouse of the person will be able to work. You don't need to be a founder to qualify. And there is a limit, however. With the O1s for extraordinary ability, you can get them indefinitely in 3-year increments. With the L1s for a new office, it's going to be valid for 1 year. Otherwise, the initial grant is valid for 3 years. There's 2-year extensions, and it's capped at 7 years. So the time limit can be a source of frustration for some, but usually most Japanese executives would have a green card before the end of the 7 years. Another option that applies to citizens of Japan is the E2 investor visa. And this would be for if you are investing, let's say $100,000 or $200,000 into a US subsidiary to get things going. Or let's say you have a Delaware C corporation, if that is owned at least 51% by citizens of Japan who do not have green cards in the US, including Japanese parent companies. So in order to get this, it takes a little bit longer and it's a little bit more capital intensive because you literally have to spend the money before you can apply for the visa. So that can slow things down for some people. So that's why people who have the ability to make this investment might choose to fast track things and hire a publicist, for example, and write some articles in order to qualify for an O1 instead of waiting, because it could take a year or more to prepare for an E2 visa. But we've had lots of multinational companies get the E2. The other nice thing about it is once you have this set up, you could bring over unlimited numbers of Japanese citizens to work in your US company. We also have the H-1B visa. I'm going to get to come to a close in the next few minutes here. The H-1B is a very popular and notorious visa, especially in the US media. So if you're reading about hiring in US companies and our lottery system and lots of international workers wanting to work in big tech companies, they're probably referring to this H-1B visa. It's for people who have professional degrees, and Congress decided to make a limit of 85,000 of these visas every year. And last year we had almost 800,000 job offers extended for these visas. So there was a lottery. Now, the government was very frustrated that people were manipulating the system and they threw out half of the entries. So it turned out that about 20% of the people were selected, but there was a lot of gaming of the system and a lot of scrutiny. So probably this March, they're going to restructure the program so that every candidate only gets one chance at being selected in the lottery, which is a shift from how they've run it in the past. So it will actually make the lottery more accessible for US small businesses. So if you are planning to open up an entity in the United States, eventually this will be a great hiring tool for you. And if you want to recruit students and graduates out of US universities, we have a lot of international students, and many of them are looking to be sponsored for H-1B visas in the lottery eventually by companies and early stage startup employers. So it's good to be aware of. Briefly on the green card process, I mentioned it could take 3 to 4 years if you're outside of the United States. If you're inside the US and you're at that level of extraordinary ability, you might be able to get a green card within 1 year to 18 months, maybe on the faster side if you already have an O1, and if you're working on some sort of emerging technology like artificial intelligence that the government is very interested in right now. So it can help for a variety of reasons to come to the US on a work visa first. There's multiple stages. Each of them can take years. Sometimes there's ways to speed it up, like if you pay more, but that might not cut down the overall amount of time, which can be a source of frustration. But depending on how you do it, if you're in the US, at some point your spouse is going to get a work permit, and at some point there may also be restrictions on your ability to travel internationally. So those are just some factors to think about if you're doing the green card process. Companies can sponsor green cards. American spouses can sponsor green cards if you get married to an American. But the green cards I really like for startup founders can be self-petitioned, which means if your company goes bankrupt, you can still have your green card as long as you're working in your field. And if you don't want to marry an American, you can still get a green card as well. So the EB-1A is the fastest. It is for extraordinary ability. It's like the O-1A that I mentioned. You can get a decision on whether you're extraordinary or not in 15 days, but the overall process could still take about a year or more if you're in the United States. That's pretty much the fastest way to get a green card. There's also an easier green card possibility if you don't have that sustained acclaim in your field for a long time that the green card requires. If you are merely working in the national interest, such as on a critical or emerging technology, or your startup is providing a key service to a group of Americans who are in need, or you're going to help the environment, or you're going to create jobs, or bring back manufacturing to the US. All of these types of things we could argue would be in the national interest, and you don't have to be extraordinary, and you can get a green card that way. A little bit of a backlog has arisen for people from Japan and several other countries. So this might take an additional year, but it's an easier route if you want to go this way. So that being said, you are welcome to get in touch with me for individual consultations. Welcome to click on the QR code. I believe that will bring you to our consultation link, and maybe also have a link for my book. Book is available on Amazon and Kindle, and it's a choose your own adventure guide for how to navigate all of these immigration things. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Kate. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Sophie, that was amazing. I mean, to demystify the whole visa thing is crazy. You did it so beautifully. And I'm actually somebody who won a visa in a lottery that brought me to the US, and I now have a green
card.
Good
fortune. It's so amazing. This is why the US needs to have these programs. We attract brilliant people like you who make a difference in the world. And
well, thank you. I think both Jay and I, who run Focus Academy, are both from outside the US, and we both have green cards. So it's just great to hear. I mean, just the ability to have 3 out of 8 categories for the extraordinary is something I had no idea about. So thank you for demystifying it. And I think we have a lot of people in our company cohorts, the cohort of companies, I should say, that would definitely check a lot of those boxes for the extraordinary visa. So I think
I'm sure. And Kate, if I can add, one of the biggest problems is humility and fear. People think I'm not good enough. I haven't tried enough. But this is where you really want to put on the hat, pretend to be an American for a day. Just pretend you're from a culture that values thought leadership and influencers and fake it till you make it. Just
Yep.
pretend and then look at your accomplishments that way. And you probably are really, really well qualified.
Oh yeah, no, they've got so many of these boxes between, you know, acceleration programs, being part of Skydeck, being part of Jetro Acceleration, their patents. I mean, they definitely, I think you've really demystified it. So not to keep using the same word, but I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I know that we're going to have lots of people checking in with you at some point. So now I would love to introduce Rohit Gupta. Rohit is one of our colleagues here at Focus Academy, and we're going to talk a little bit about investment. And Jeff and Sophie both discussed about investing in or having an investor in the US, and how does that kind of help you, or, you know, does it hinder you? But mostly it helps you when you're developing your business. But Rohit, can you tell us a little bit about your background? Because you've had quite a wide variety of experience in the venture capital space, in investment communities, what you're doing currently with future communities. It would be lovely to just get a little bit of your background.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and actually learned a lot from both Jeff and Sophie. So always great to be around smart people, and great to meet everyone here. My name is Rohit Gupta. I run a venture capital fund called Future Communities Capital. We are an early stage, so seed and pre-seed VC fund. We focus on legacy industries, so a lot of investment into healthcare, government, retail, logistics, supply chain, real estate, prop tech. Pretty generalist. I'd say we like very slow, difficult to innovate industries. I've been in venture capital for 15 years. I tend to invest early, but we do have some later stage investments as well. Very opportunistic fund, and I'd say we value innovation and people.
Right. And I know you've been involved in the AI kind of community more recently, and that's where we met, was at some of these events in San Francisco. And we actually have a couple of AI companies from Japan that are on this call right now. So I'm just kind of curious, maybe we should kick it off with that. Like, have you seen international companies? Have you been dealing with internationals who are looking to land here in the US? More recently in the AI space, for instance?
Yeah, we talk to international companies all the time. I wouldn't say we're a global fund. We're open to global investment. AI is really interesting. In domestically, we look at a lot of companies and a lot of startups, and I think that internationally there's a real opportunity, because what's happening here domestically, it has to be localized. It has to happen in every country. It has to happen in every language. It's very difficult to, for example, in America, we're building stuff in English, and are we doing that in Japanese? Yeah, maybe, but it isn't the same as if a Japanese startup is building it in Japanese.
Yeah. And, you know, particularly in the healthcare space, we're seeing companies that are developing digital technology based on the algorithms, machine learning, and then looking to develop that into the US market. So that can be quite tough. Are you, have you had any experience in the digital health space specifically? And if not, just in general, kind of, what are your thoughts on an international Japanese company wanting to raise funds here? Do you have any thoughts on that generally?
We've done a lot in digital health. I think it's one of those spaces where foreign companies can come here. The challenge, well, there's a couple of challenges. One is, if they're coming to the US for investment, there's an expectation that the US is going to be, they're going to sell to the US, sell to US customers. And it's a challenge for regulatory issues. We have a very, some people call it challenging regulatory scheme here, with approvals and right to sell product. That can be tough. And also just on the other side, like, who's paying for it? Like, our healthcare system is you have to know the ins and outs, right? So our payer model is very different because of insurance, and I don't want to get too into that, but it's something I think companies have to figure out before they come here and try and raise capital.
Yeah. Another thing that I think keeps coming up, and Sophie mentioned it, and we can chat a little bit with Sophie and Jeff about this, is the kind of investment that is, if you're coming to the US, you know, the visa might require some investment. Does that investment need to come from the VCs? And there's this 51% I keep hearing. Do you have any ideas around kind of company ownership, US kind of subsidiary? You know, what does an investor look for? Are they looking for that company to be located here? The whole inversion kind of situation.
We tend to be flexible about it. I would say that on average, most US investors want a US entity. So they want probably like, like was mentioned, Delaware C Corp, because it just makes exits easier,
Okay.
right? If I'm thinking like long-term exit and the company's going to, go public on the stock market, having a Delaware entity is kind of the way to do it, Otherwise, if a company's looking for an M&A and they want to be bought by a larger company, that isn't as essential, but it's really tough to say we're aiming for one and not the other. It's important, and for a lot of investors, it's important to have a Delaware-based entity, specifically within the U.S. Delaware, just because it's well known, the structures are very clear, and there's a lot of case law around it, and the less variables you have, the less, if you focus novel in your company, your product, and not novel in the other parts of your business, it just makes it easier.
Okay, no, that's really good to know. You know what? I think I'll open it up here with Jeff and Sophie also, because I think there might be a couple of other questions that are coming up in this kind of whole area. I mean, Sophie, you mentioned when you were talking about a particular type of visa, about this $100,000 to $200,000 kind of investment. Could you explain a little bit about what you meant there? Was that the company needed to have that money in the US?
If you want a particular type of visa called an E2 investor visa, where the investor can get a visa, or the CEO, or anybody, as long as they have a Japanese passport, including future Japanese employees or engineers, or executives, that type of visa, the investor has to invest $100,000 to $200,000 into a US entity. And so that can get complicated with playing the startup game and accepting VC funding. So one of my clients recently had to go through a lot of corporate law machinations because they had been majority owned by citizens of their country, including angel investors, for a very long time. But they got to their Series B and they raised $40 million. And all of a sudden it was like, well, if we raise the money, all of our key executives have to leave because we didn't get them O1 visas soon enough. So I prefer the O1 for a variety of reasons, but that E2 is great if you simply want an LLC subsidiary to go to market in the States, but you're not planning to raise funding here.
Okay, great. Jeff, do you have any comments also on your experience? Like, have you got any great, even a success story of a company that kind of ended up coming here, maybe setting up their C Corp, and then being able to leverage that maybe to raise more money? Do you have any clients in that space?
Yeah, it's very coincidental. Just this morning, I introduced another one. I've had a few, but I just introduced another one to Sophie. And she's going to be helping them hopefully with their O1 visas. So they've come over. This was a group out of Romania. They had a business going there. They then got accepted into Techstars in Oakland, of all places, where I live, the city I live in. And so now we're helping them to get to that next stage. They've got some investor interest. They've got partnerships now going with some very recognizable brands. If I were to name them, everyone on the call would know them. And so, yeah, they're now taking that next step. They've set up their Delaware C Corp, and they're starting to make themselves attractive to folks like Rohit, and who they want to have the characteristics that investors are looking for.
Fantastic. That's really great news. Ro, do you have anything else in this kind of whole area of investing in an external company? Like, have you had any recent stories, either good or bad, that you can give us just to demonstrate, what companies have had to go through?
Yeah, so the last two foreign companies or foreign founders we invested in was one out of the UK, London, I think Cambridge specifically, and then one out of Munich in Germany. And both of those founders, they started with a Delaware corporation, even though they don't live here. I don't know if either of them had even set foot in the US before they started their company, but they just knew that the sort of the arc that they're going to follow was required a Delaware C corp. So do it early, or another company. They have a subsidiary that they're using, or I think they're based in the US and then their home country is a subsidiary. And we're looking at a company right now that is based in the US and opening a subsidiary in Canada. So these things happen. US investors, we, like all things American, we tend to not really do a lot of, foreign world is sort of weird to us. We tend to be very sort of insular in some regards. And I think that it happens, and it's just being able to communicate the story so investors understand it. And the more plain and simple and vanilla it is, then it's great. It works. And I don't think investors are skittish about it at all.
Great. No, that's really good to know. And I know a lot of the Japanese clients that we've been talking to are coming here a lot of times to open up their markets. And obviously they do a little bit more prep on the regulatory and reimbursement side. I mean, that's really, really important. But they do know that they're coming here also to raise more funds for expansion because they've reached kind of the limit that they can get in their own home markets. So having all of this expertise from the investment side, from the immigration side, from the market readiness side, I mean, there's just, it makes it so much easier if people are talking ahead of time and preparing. Yuri, I don't know if we have any questions. Do we have any questions from we'd like to open it up to the attendees. If anybody has any specific questions they'd like to put into the Q&A, that would be great. Let me see if. Okay, so we have a CEO, Keita, of Blank AI, which is providing AI co-pilots for job interviews. Looks like he's progressing the visa application and currently establishing a Delaware company. After completing market research, we are developing our product. We have a wait list of 20 companies considering raising seed funding. We're cold emailing US VCs, but haven't received a single reply. Well, that's something we can definitely talk about offline. I am targeting specific individuals at VC firms with clear reasons for wanting to speak with them, but if there's no response, should I continue in this way? I think that this is kind of more of a detailed, we would normally work directly with a company who, rather than cold call VCs, we would work with you to help understand who are the right VCs that you need to talk to. Are they in the area that you're specifically targeting in the market? What is their portfolio companies? How do they align with what you're doing? And then we're a lot more strategic about connecting you to those VCs. Unfortunately, a lot of VCs do get a lot of emails and they have a generic application form on their website. So that does not make it very easy, but I think that's something that's a little bit more detailed. But Rohit, maybe you could add in there your experience of the cold calling situation, because it's tough.
Absolutely. Cold calling is almost impossible to close a deal. And I appreciate founders that do it. The challenge is I'm a very difficult person to find on the internet. I don't keep social media presence. I'm just, this is a very rare thing for me to even do something public. I just don't do it. I don't need to. Even my point is that, like, even with that little activity, public activity, I still get about 100 to 200 cold emails a week, probably more. Every day people are writing me, hey, will you talk to me, my company? And it's too hard to sort through. My best advice is get a warm intro. And if a founder that I invested in, or another investor, or somebody says, hey, you should go talk to this founder, I'll do it 10 out of 10 times, right? So find somebody who knows, like you've done the hard part is first get a bunch of target VCs, right? And then find somebody that you know in common with them. And LinkedIn is great for this. And then sort of, get them to do the networking thing. And it doesn't have to be your best friend. It can be, oh, okay, I know somebody who works at a company that, that this fund invested in, and they know that partner at the fund, then I can get an introduction. And then the conversation goes from there. And I think you sort of organically figured out that cold emailing is really hard and doesn't often work. There are other ways, I feel like Focus probably has some intros. You can reach out to me.
Yeah.
Find me on the internet, rohit@futurecommunity.vc. I'll put that in the chat.
Thank
Happy
you.
to see if I can help.
No,
Good luck.
that's really great advice. And I do agree with you. I think it's like trying to find a customer and just walking up to somebody on the street and ask them, will they buy your product? You have to know what your customer is looking for, and you have to know what the VC is looking for. And then you make a match with a warm introduction, because you can't possibly go through 200 emails a week just with cold, But anyway, that's really good advice.
Hey, Kate, before you move on, could I add one
Yeah, please
point
do.
to this? This is a really important topic, right? Is reaching the right investors. Within our program at Silicon Valley in Your Pocket, we actually templatize anything and everything. I get asked, I'm sure Rohit mentioned he gets 100 without seeking it. I get similar numbers on a monthly basis. I get just dozens and dozens of these requests. Hey, so-and-so, could you connect me? Or you're an angel investor, would you invest in me? We've templatized this. If you are going to ask me to connect you to someone in my LinkedIn network, I will send you a template, and it will force you to go do the research on that individual, why to reach them, why they would be interested in you. You have to make it easy for the person you're asking to make that warm intro to hit forward, put a small cover note on top of your email that explains why that person should be interested in you. It's they know why you're interested in them. That's the easy part. The hard part is making it interesting for them to know why they should be interested in you. So really not just leverage your warm contacts, make it super easy for your warm contacts to make that connection on your behalf by giving them all the info they need. That's what our templatized approach is all about.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeff. That's really, really helpful. So Sophie, it sounds like you've worked with so many different types of founders, and it sounds like the O visa is kind of your visa of choice. Is that true, or what would you say?
Oh, it's the most useful, I think, for early stage founders, because you don't have to be rich and you don't have to have this long corporate track record, and you don't have to pay a huge salary, and there's no lottery. So there's things that make it accessible that I really like about it. And the one thing I wanted to add, because I see these trends of who got funded, more and more founders who are coming to me for O1s who have VC funding already, and then no, that's not required. But more of them are saying, to Keita's point, a wait list of 20 companies. I'm seeing more and more that founders are simply selling their product and getting as far as they can without raising money, and then they're waiting to a later stage to accept investment in order to scale when it's absolutely needed. So I'm sure, it depends on your company and your product, and Kate, who you know, and Jeff, and the individual investors. But just as a trend across what founders are doing, I'm seeing more and more with lots of paying customers only then go out and start to approach VCs. But yeah, the O1 works for them. The O1 works if you don't have investment yet.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let me just check the chat and see if there are any more questions. I'm actually not seeing any more. Do you guys have any questions that you want to throw out, or common questions that come up for you? Excuse me.
I think just cultural differences are important to note. Like I saw that, there had been a follow-up question of, can we talk to you further in the Q&A panel? And I think, Jeff, you're really good at, maybe you could share a little bit about this, because I think it's part of your curriculum, but it's like, What do people from Japan need to understand about how business culture in the US is different, and how and when it's appropriate to approach people? Because I think people are often too timid and that can hold them back in the US, but they're being culturally appropriate for what they know, but Americans would be way more aggressive. So how could you help us capture that?
Yeah, no, thanks for tossing it, because it is something we do go through on a routine basis, because most of our work is with founders outside the US, many of whom who want to either conduct business or raise capital here. And so we actually have a whole separate presentation called Startupping American Style. And it's really going through those cultural differences about how business is conducted here, how outreach is conducted here, how to, engage the ecosystem here. When we recently had a group in from South Korea, also a more generally speaking, a more timid culture. We had to really encourage them to go to events outside of our program, and don't just sit together. There's a lot of people, and I understand the inclination when you're traveling abroad with a group, you want to stick together, safety in numbers, etc. But the goal was go mingle with other people outside of your cohort who are here together, traveling. And we had one founder who was just a master at it. By the time he finished our 5-week program, he'd attended 22 external events across Silicon Valley and San Francisco. And we just sung the praises of this individual, because it was not the norm for their group, and not even for him, to just go to these events on a whim, right? They hear about an event down in Palo Alto. They were taking the train, going down, taking an Uber, going to the event. They really put in the effort. And we encourage that a lot, is maximize the effort when you are here, meet the people here, and understand that we do business differently. It's, I don't want to get into the details of all of our presentation stuff, but there are quite significant differences in how Americans conduct their business. And I think it's worth knowing that before, again, as I said earlier, maximize your readiness before you leave to arrive here if you're going to try and come over here and do business, whether it's for a visit or whether it's for a move. Just understand the cultural differences. They're critically important and can really make the difference between success or not success, or at least the timeline upon which you're able to succeed.
Yeah, I think you bring a good point, Jeff. And now, thankfully, we are seeing more events happening. And I was thinking about the whole investor kind of connections. Showing up to these events, coming over here twice a year is really worth it, and packing your schedule and trying to get to meet as many people as possible. And I know that there are CEOs who've come over here 3 or 4 times a year and raised money and look like they're here all the time, because they're showing up at the right events and they're seeing the same people, and it doesn't matter where they're actually in, sorry.
If you could take 2 trips a year for 3 weeks each, which months would you choose to be in the San Francisco Bay Area?
Oh my gosh. I think I would probably do April till June and September until December.
But not 3 months, 3 weeks. If that's
3 weeks. Sorry. 3 weeks. I think it's just really important to see what conferences you should be attending and when they're happening, right? So TechCrunch, if it's a bio conference, you want to go to San Diego, you should go to bio in June. If you want to go to health, you're going to go, I don't know if that was in Texas this year. I think you just have to look at where are the conferences and where am I going to meet the most stakeholders, whether they be investors, partners, or customers. And then you plan your trip around that. And that's when you get those people in meetings too, because they're away from their desks and they're open for coffee or dinner or lunch. And we talk about that all the time. Pack your schedule with all of these. JP Morgan's coming up, and whether or not you're a pharmaceutical company, and certainly most of ours are not public, but it's now become San Francisco Bio Week. So it's a big kind of festival of biotechnology, diagnostics, and everything in between. So don't be put off by JPM. It's actually really just a meeting place for folks to meet and gather and hang out in the same, well, not the St. Francis, but the all the other hotels in the area. Anyway, I could go on about that, but I think it's going to be pretty busy this year. I think JP Morgan, for those of you in the life science and healthcare space, There's lots of startup events happening in and around the big conference, and definitely tons of networking events. So I think you should be here after the 7th of January if you're not going to CES. So that's my pitch. Anything else that you guys, I can't see any other questions
We
coming
did get
in.
another question from Hiroshi just now in the Q&A panel.
Oh, okay. When to incorporate a Delaware C Corp. I'm Wes. I provide AI workforce on Slack called Q. I've incorporated my company in Tokyo 3 years ago. My current customer base is in the US, and I'd like to build an international team. So I'm planning to move and operate my business in the US now. Also to fundraise from the US investors like Y Combinator. It's inevitable to incorporate C Corp in Delaware State. I also need a visa because with ESTA, I have to go to Japan and back to San Francisco every 90 days, and it's risky. So when to incorporate a new corporation? Should I start it right now or should I wait for something beforehand? I'm going to stay for 3 months from January to April in San Francisco, by the way. Jeff, I think that's probably a good kickoff maybe for you.
So, again, my comment that I made earlier, I'll just reiterate a little bit, which is if you're planning to raise capital and you're going to talk to US investors, I think Rohit echoed the same point. The common and more comfortable approach is to have a Delaware C Corp. I generally say if you are dead set on raising capital in the US before you've even gotten here, get your Delaware C Corp out of the way. And I say that because if you say to an investor, well, if you're willing to invest, we'll go and set up the Delaware C Corp, you've just infused friction into them parting ways with a check. Because now there's something that has to happen before they can write that check to you. So my attitude is eliminate any friction at all before you start talking to investors. Because if you capture their attention, what you don't want to have is something that's going to bump them off the rails. You don't want to derail that enthusiasm or momentum. So my personal view is get that out of the way as quickly as possible, and then go talk to investors because you've eliminated the friction points that can step into the way. I don't know, Rohit, if you would agree with that as a professional investor, but that would be my recommendation. That's what we recommend when we deal with companies in this situation.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and specifically more to that point that before you even come here, you want it done. Not like paperwork is filed, it's going to close. Like things get delayed, things take longer. Maybe there's a typo. Things just you don't want that hanging out. Like I've definitely been in a situation where we were going to invest in a company. I think they were out of the Philippines, and they were just, oh well, it's going to happen. We're waiting for paperwork, and by the time they got the paperwork, it's just like, not gonna. We're not interested anymore. We moved on.
So to be cautious on the other side of this, I can see reasons to wait. So I'm just going to play devil's advocate and then you can figure out what happy medium you want. I see lots of people with stale Delaware C Corps that weren't able to raise, and now their company's like a year old and they're still lukewarm talking to investors. I think if you work with amazing supporters like Kate and Jeff to set up those warm intros, then you have a support network in place and it's okay to take that risk and incorporate sooner. But from a US immigration side of things, okay, if you're in Japan, you can use Stripe Atlas to incorporate a Delaware C Corporation. You can own the thing from Japan. You can get a Mercury bank account through their API from Japan for your US Delaware C Corporation. You can start accepting payments. That all works when you're outside of the United States. The risk though is suddenly you're trying to come here on ESTA on a business trip, but you're the CEO of a US company, which could be interpreted by the random border officer that you get at the airport as unauthorized work in the United States. So if you're just the owner of a US company and you're not coming here to make money, I mean, people do that all the time, but you have to be persuasive about it at the airport. Certainly, if you put CEO of a US company on your LinkedIn, they have that when they're looking at your visas, visa interviews at the airport, they look at your social media. So I would advise not putting CEO on your LinkedIn. You could be a founder, you could be an owner. So you want to tread really cautiously because you're not allowed to work in the United States when you're here on ESTA. And that's interpreted as basically providing services for the hope of money in the future, even if you're not being paid directly. So, maybe queue up interest, work with Kate, work with Jeff, talk to Rohit, start getting warm intros to line up your business itinerary if you're sure that you can have a meaningful trip and have valuable in-person meetings when you're here. Then, maybe start the incorporation process shortly before arriving. But if you're simply coming to oh, I want to see San Francisco and figure out if I want to live here one day, then I would say don't incorporate at that stage.
Well, I think, Wes, it sounds like you need to speak to Sophie first, and then you also need to speak to Jeff, and you need to speak to Rohit. So check in with me, and I will connect you if you don't have their emails, because I think you're getting lots of great advice, and hopefully we can help you get your business off the ground here, but in the right way, so we don't get you caught up in complicated situations at the airport, as Sophie explained. Thank you, Sophie, for putting some reality on that. Really appreciate it. So guys, I think we do not have any more questions. I know that, oh, wait a minute. Sorry, we have another one. Kazumasa Oba is the CEO of Developatonia, which is providing business reporting AI generation service for firms doing a business developing in emerging countries. Is it possible to first raise funds and then establish a C Corp? Or is establishing a C Corp in advance really inevitable to raise funds in the US? So I think maybe Jeff, if you could, or Rohit would kick that off, but I think we already kind of covered that, right? That having the C Corp was more important first, right?
Yeah, I don't know, Rohit, if you want to address it. It sounds like the business, I don't know if the business is being done in the US or it's being done in these developing emerging countries. If you're not doing business in the US, again, I would go back to my questions that I raised for consideration. Is the US the best market to establish in? If your business is being done in the US, then as we said a few moments ago, I think Rohit's and my conversation was more about establishing the C Corp in advance, but I understand the considerations that Sophie is raising around, do you have a proper visa? Can you even do business in the US? So I'm not sure if that's an answer, but those are some things that come to mind.
Yeah, I think what we need to do is talk to this company in more detail about where they're at and where their markets are at, because there would be no point in them developing a C Corp if emerging countries is their market, as you pointed out earlier. So I think there's a lot of maybe checks, go or no go checks that might need. I'm looking at that particular, remembering that particular slide that Jeff presented. So it sounds like that's not an easy question to answer, but if you reach out to us, we will definitely follow up with you. But thank you for that question. It's definitely an interesting one. Great. I think anybody else popping up with any questions here? I don't think so.
And I have a question for Rohit, if it's okay.
Great.
Sure.
What's your perspective as an investor? Because I attempted at one point to raise an immigrant fund to invest in immigrant founders, and it was a different market. It was a different time. But basically what VCs told me was, I have an obligation to my limited partners to deploy their funds in the most direct way possible. I'm simply looking for good deal flow. I'm not particularly interested in if they're immigrants or not, because that's not the thing that gives me a return. And I have this fiduciary duty to my LPs to invest their money in simply the best deals from all over the world. And people will be disqualified if they can't comply with US immigration. So I'm just curious for US investors, yourself or others, or what the culture is, but how do you perceive investing in immigrants, in global companies doing their US expansion? Is there a disadvantage for those founders? Is it equal? How do you think about it?
I don't see any disadvantages. I think there are advantages investing in immigrants. I think that's very strange advice that you were given. It's
Oh,
if you
no.
believe,
I
you know,
talked to a variety of people. It was strange.
right.
It was like
I
people
mean, I
could
get,
raise $5 million with a slide deck at that time. So maybe
yeah,
it's just, no, why would we mess around with that? Like, this is so easy. I don't know.
yeah. I mean, there are definitely funds that their entire thesis is investing in immigrants,
Yeah.
right? They're funds that are like not even that. They're very specific. Like, we only invest in immigrants on H-1B visas.
It's true.
You know, like these, it's out there, and it's. I think it works. Immigrants in this country that you probably target are very ambitious. They're highly educated. They probably came here, you know, for a graduate degree of some sort. Like, it sort of checks the boxes. They probably have a lot of work experience, but they go and strike out on their own. You know, like culturally,
Okay.
I get it. You could make a thesis around it, and I would buy it. You know,
Yeah.
I'm open to it. I love it. Investing in immigrants, investing in global companies. I think the U.S. is a large market, but it's not the only market in the world. Like, I think that's a very U.S. centric view. That it doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. Cool. What are the things that you prefer to look at when you're deciding the value of a company and a particular investment?
So I invest so early that there's often it can be pre-product, or if there's product that's they don't have a lot of market traction, like they may not have product market fit. So for me, it really boils down to people. I've never invested in somebody I don't like personally. I never invest in people who I think are doing bad things. They have to treat people well. They have to treat their team members well. They have to be building something that I value. And then, we can figure the rest out. I think that the flip side of that argument is that most early stage companies are going to pivot, right? So if I say I'm only investing in company A because of product A, well, what happens if product A doesn't work out? And that's usually the case. They have to change strategy, they have to change something, It's very myopic to say this is the only thing that I like about the company. And really what stands the test of time is the people.
Okay, thank you.
Kate, I just threw a link into the chat window for all participants here with the slides that I have shared this evening, just in case anyone wants to have them.
Perfect.
Yeah, so just
Thank
want to
you.
point that out for others.
Yeah, and also just to let people know that this has been recorded and it will be available on the Jetro website. So if you or any of your colleagues want to check in with some of the content that was shared or some of the questions that we answered, hopefully, let me check and see one more time. Yes, that's the link from Jeff, but we will definitely share all the slides also from Sophie, and any follow-up questions, please reach out to us or through Yuri and the team at Jetro, and we'll make those connections. Thank you guys. I mean, gosh, I've learned so much through this as well today, that this was we should have done this at the beginning of the year, but that's the way these things happen. But it's nice to do it at the end of the year. Thank you so much, guys, for participating. I know we will be coming back to this, market readiness, investor readiness, and obviously immigration readiness. We'll be talking about this again.
Hey, we're just doing this so early that it's before the beginning of the year.
That's true.
We're ahead of schedule. That's right.
That is true. But thank you guys for your time. I really, really appreciate it. It was just really great to hear your points of view and from your expertise. You guys are in the trenches and you've seen what happens. So it's been really valuable for sharing it with our Jetro clientele, and we look forward to more partnership opportunities in 2024. So thanks, guys. We appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you very much,
everybody. Have a great rest of your days.
Thanks,
You
everybody.
too.
Happy holidays. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.